Hi everyone, today I'm talking about 22 things that I look for when it comes to playing and buying new board games. So recently I've released a video called 26 things I avoid in board games, and this is almost like a counterpoint to that video and almost like the positive spin on it. And I've tried to avoid doing the polar opposite of things that featured on the other video because that would be a little bit boring. So I've got a bunch of different reasons here, different things that I look for, and hopefully you find the video interesting and enjoyable. But before I get into the list, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, Kienda.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer in the UK. They've got a fantastic website, loads of games on sale, and have some brilliant loyalty schemes as well. So be sure to check out the link in my show notes to get 5% off your first order. But without further ado, let's get started on the list. So the first thing I look for are games where you simply cannot get everything done. I like it when games kind of build up to this crescendo, and just as you've got your engine as you want it, the game ends. And you think, if I only had one more turn, then it would have been perfect. But that might sound frustrating, but for me, that really does give me that incentive and that desire to come back and improve upon my previous games and to become more and more efficient, and just gives you more things to explore. You know, there's nothing worse than in your first game or two, you completely maxed out everything and you've got nothing else to improve upon. That for me just completely eradicates any desire I have to come back and visit. So some games that spring to mind that feature this heavily are games like Lorenzo Il Magnifico and Pulsar 2849. The next thing I really enjoy in board games is player-driven economies. So what I mean by this is, for example, like auction games, when somebody's putting something up for auction and you're buying things from them, that money goes to that player. So it kind of adds a whole new wrinkle to the gameplay where you have to consider the net gain. Yes, you might be getting something great, but you could be giving your opponent a bunch of money, which they can use to buy something even greater. For me, that is just a thing of beauty, and I love that string of interaction. I also really enjoy it when games manage to synergize different parts of the game with each other. And what I mean by that is where this little part of the game here will affect this part and this part will affect this part. And they all kind of have this string that attach all the different departments with each other. That for me is why I really enjoy Euro games in general, because I just think it's a thing of beauty and just genius design when designers manage to pull this off to a high standard. I also really love time tracks in games, or you could also call it like a ratchet system. So what I mean by this is when games give you a plethora of options and you can go as far as you want, but you can never go back on yourself. However, when you go really far to get the exact juicy thing that you want, you are forsaking a lot of other things in the process and can give your opponents a bunch of opportunities to mop everything up behind you. So I love that kind of decision space of, am I willing to sacrifice all of this to get this? And some of my favorite games use this just brilliantly. Looking here, I've got Glenmore 2 Chronicles, which is just the perfect example of that, of what am I willing to sacrifice to get exactly what I want. I also really enjoy positive player interaction. So what I mean by this is that when I do something, it's going to affect the other players. And rather than me, destroying their things, I like it thinking that, if I do this, yes, it's going to help me, but it might help everybody else more than me. For me, that is where interaction really does shine. I think it's much more interesting than being destructive. And there's some fantastic games out there that use this, such as Concordia and games like Puerto Rico. You have to do things at the right time to make sure that other people aren't getting more than you do. Another thing that is becoming increasingly important to me is designer pedigree. The track record of great designers just speaks for itself. And as time goes on, it normally ends up that the games that stay in my collection are from a select few designers because they are the best at what they do. Don't get me wrong, I'm certainly willing to give people a chance, and I'm willing to be sold and invest in certain new designers. But if you give me a game, or you tell me about a new Stefan Feld game or a new Rudiger Dorn or Vladimir Suki game, then I'm pretty much going to be all in without even knowing about it because their track record is so strong. I'm also a big fan of a modest production, and I might be in the minority in this one because it seems like more and more games are putting more deluxe versions out there, giving you a bunch of superfluous things that do not alter the gameplay whatsoever. I am more than willing to throw all that stuff out the window just for a nice, good looking, high quality product. But again, I don't need all the bells and whistles. I don't need miniatures. I don't need metal coins. I don't need a bunch of space being taken up just for the sake of it. Another really important thing for me is a game being self-contained. So when I buy a game, I want it to be the complete product and not have the complete need to keep buying new material, new things, new cards, new factions. All that stuff just does not appeal to me at all. Just give me a finished product that's going to stand the test of time and keep me coming back to it without the need to keep spending and spending and spending. It's also really important to me that the games I buy play well and scale well down to 2 players, because normally when I'm playing a more heavier, a bigger box, a more complex Euro, then I'm going to be playing at those lower player counts. Now, don't get me wrong, there are certainly a few exceptions to this. Some of my favourite games of all time require at least 3 players, but generally speaking, most of the games here over my shoulder will play perfectly fine and, even exceed at 2 players. Another thing that will instantly pique my interest is when games try something different, something innovative, something new and fresh. There's so many new games coming out, it seems like more and more things are being recycled, and they're pretty much just carbon copies of games already out there. And to be honest, they normally are not improvements on those classic designs. So normally I don't even care how minor these tweaks are. Just try something different, try something new, and just be willing to take a gamble. It's also important to me that these games have some degree of strategy to them. Now, I'm not saying that these games need to be a pure strategic decision where you have to get started on a plan of action from the get-go with no room to maneuver around that, but I do like that thread of strategy with something to aim towards, and again, something just to steer you in the right direction. So yeah, strategy is important to me, but with tactical elements to them as well. I also love games with multiple paths to victory. So there's nothing worse really than having to do the same thing game after game after game. I like it where you get this game back to the table and you can try something completely different, and all these different pathways are balanced. You've got a viable chance of winning no matter what you do. These are the games that kind of keep me coming back to them because, again, I can try something different every single time and make the game feel like a new experience each time I get it back to the table. Now, I talked about on my last video how much I despise random output, i.e. roll to resolve style games, but on contrary to that, I really do enjoy random input games. So what I mean by this is where you have some kind of random element and then you have to work with that in order to be as efficient as you can. So games that spring to mind are games like Marco Polo or Trismegistus, where you are drafting or rolling dice and having to work with what you've got. And also I like it when if you are using dice that the sixes aren't necessarily stronger than the ones. You can use them and they all have their own strengths and weaknesses. Games like Bora Bora really use that kind of system to a ultra high standard. It's also important to me that these games have some degree of engine building to them. I like it when at the start of the game you are much weaker than you are at the end of the game. You're becoming more efficient, you're unlocking more income, you're unlocking special abilities and building up a tableau of cards. There's nothing more satisfying than building up that engine and feeling powerful. Pretty much all of my games have some degree of this, no matter how minor or how significant. But games such as St. Petersburg, games like Terra Mystica and Boon Lake are great examples of engine building games. This one might sound like a boring one, but I'm a big fan of climbing tracks. Most people are going to be put off by that because they think it's a dry, boring mechanism, but I love seeing how far I can get. And I like it, the further you commit to a certain track, the rewards and the dividends you get from committing so heavily are going to really pay off. I also really enjoy tight resource management. So what I mean by this is that when you end up collecting these resources, which might have taken a bit of effort, you have to really decide on what you want to spend those resources on. If I'm going to buy this, I'm going to have to sacrifice doing this. For me, there's nothing worse when games shower you in resources and you can pretty much buy whatever you want, whenever you want. It just takes a lot of tension and a lot of gravitas out of the experience. So games that really do shine in this side of things are games like Barrage. It's so hard to build up the infrastructure to get what you want done, but you have to commit to what you've done and sacrifice something else in the process. I also love a good chain reaction system in a game. Combos, domino effect style things where if you do this, it will trigger this, which will trigger that, which will trigger that. That for me feels really satisfying. And when you line things up ultra carefully and you flick that switch and just watch everything just cascade and get a bunch of rewards and resources and points in the process, that for me is a thing of beauty and exactly what I love in these Euro style games. The more and more I play games, the more important it is to me that games are streamlined. You know, when a good designer knows what they can take out of the game without hurting or affecting the overall experience. Now, there's nothing worse when a game has a bunch of just needlessly complex and fiddly rules for the sake of it. So the best of the best games managed to pull this off. I'm talking games like Concordia, games like Babylonia, games like Hansa Teutonica. The rules themselves are so simple, however, the plethora and the fallout of your decisions are massive. And those for me are always the games that stand the test of time. And unlike most gamers nowadays, I'm actually a huge fan of the traditional dry, dusty, beige Euro themes that you don't really see much nowadays. You know, I'm perfectly happy playing the part of a noble in Renaissance Italy, or being a spice trader, or exploring the world. I like colonial games. I like industrial style games. Most games nowadays seem to have a fancy theme or a nature style theme, and that's all great. But give me a dry, dusty Euro any day. Now, something that I almost unanimously enjoy is when games use incentive building in their games. Now, that might not be the right terminology, but that's what I always call it. Now, what I mean by this is if something's neglected on the board and nobody's gone to that particular spot, then the incentive slowly grows throughout it. Then maybe a coin accumulates on it, meaning that I might not want that action, but I want the whole bunch of resources and coins on it. Games like Le Havre use this to a great stand. The longer you wait, the more things build up. Or even No Thanks and Firenze use this to a cool standard where even these negative cards, like really awful cards that you do not want, they get so inviting due to the other stuff that you're willing to take the punishment that goes hand in hand with it. Commodity speculation is becoming something I'm enjoying more and more in my games. Now, what I mean by this is that maybe you're collecting something, but the value of that thing you're collecting can fluctuate as the game goes on, and it can even be manipulated. So I really like this idea of tailoring what you do, and you can really ramp up the points and the value you get from what you're doing based on your own individual strategy. There's so many good games out there that use this, but some that spring to mind are games like Ys, which is a really underrated Euro game, where you can push up the value of the things that you're collecting. Additionally, games like Chinatown do this to a wonderful degree, because you might end up taking this spot and you can sit on this spot until it becomes extremely valuable to somebody else and they're willing to pay you a bunch of money for it. And the final thing that I'm talking about on this list is supply and demand. There are so many games that use supply and demand in lots of different ways. But generally what I mean is, buy low, sell high, cash in on things when they're worth more points. Or when you're buying things, they shift the value up, and when you're selling things, it shifts the value down for the other players. For me, this is such a cool thing to put into board games, and it's so simple to pull off as well. So many great games use supply and demand, such as Navigador, where certain resources are worth a fortune at the beginning of the game, but that manages to turn and change and shift as the game goes on. Or even games like Power Grid, where you can really kind of tailor yourself a bit of a niche where you're the only person who deals with this certain resource, therefore you can probably get it cheaper. But if everybody's dealing with the same resource, then they're going to be pushing the prices up for each other, which means you might want to zigzag at the right times. Just a brilliant feature, and I absolutely love it. So there we have it. Those are the 22 things that I look out for when it comes to purchasing new board games. Hopefully the video has been useful for you and has given you a better impression of the kind of games that I enjoy and the things that I look out for. I'd also love to hear the things that you look out for when you hear a game is on the horizon, to see if that game is going to be like an instant buy for you, etc. If you have enjoyed the video, please be sure to hit like and subscribe to the channel and check out my additional content too. Additionally, be sure to check out the show's sponsor, kienda.co.uk, and if you want to go that extra step, I also have a Patreon page for you to support the channel and keep it going strong. But for everybody else, I'll see you next time on Chairman of the Board. Bye now.